Welcome back, folks. Our next feature will confound you, confuse you, and hopefully have you screaming, "Not in my backyard." Here's our important story of oil and gas leasing in Utah.
Canyonlands National Park, Dead Horse Point State Park. Words fall short when trying to describe this sacred landscape shaped by eons of wind and water.
We're in an area called Big Flat, right next to the entrance for Dead Horse Point State Park and the Island in the Sky district of Canyonlands National Park. We're in proximity, as the crow flies, we're less than a mile from Canyonlands and less than about an eighth of a mile from Dead Horse Point, one of the most scenic areas in southern Utah, and it's been really hammered with oil exploration and development. So we're walking up towards a full drilling rig, quite an operation.
The recent shift in policy at the national level is having a direct impact on the places we love right here in Utah. The current administration says they are moving beyond energy independence to energy dominance, and this phrase should frighten every American who cares about wilderness.
What these men have done and what they're doing is taking the soul out of Utah for generations to come for a small sip of porridge right now. It's a terrible thing, and the majority of Utahns disagree with what they're doing. They want this land protected.
Over 65% of Utah is public land. That is, land owned by every U.S. citizen. The Federal Bureau of Land Management is custodian for much of this land. As part of their mandate for multi-use management, the BLM leases land for mineral and natural resource extraction, the most common being timber, coal, natural gas, and oil. The revenue stream provided by these leases is shared between federal, state, and local governments.
They follow what I like to call a lease first, think later approach. So they'll sell the leases, they'll sell the property right for somebody to come in and develop it, and assure you that later, when the company shows up, that's when everything will be dealt with, but that's too late in the process.
Sometimes oil companies request a parcel that is adjacent to wilderness areas, or in this case, on the edge of national parks or state parks, places people come to get away from city smells and light pollution.
As you can hear, pretty significant noise pollution, air pollution. I mean, it smells out here. And impacts on the land. Obviously, these drill pads are typically 5 acres. They're not easily reclaimed, especially in this extremely arid desert environment.
In the Big Flat area of Moab, there exists leases that were auctioned years ago, but fortunately remain a bit scattered and most undeveloped. However, this is a perfect example of the, quote, foot in the door. Once a lease is granted, changing course based on environmental concerns can prove very difficult. Some of these leases date back to the 1970s, and in the Big Flats area alone, there are 54 more wells approved, just waiting to be developed. The only thing delaying development is the cost of extraction in relation to the price of oil.
Once an area is leased, the federal agency, the Bureau of Land Management, can put some restrictions on the drilling, but it becomes extremely difficult. There are some things that can happen to minimize the impact, but again, really the most important critical point in the process is the lease sale. After that, it really becomes a matter of mitigating the impact, not so much as stopping the impact from happening.
In Utah, about 23 million acres of land fall under BLM management. The state is split into field offices and subunits. Each office has an individual plan, making some land available for oil and gas leasing. Companies that want to mine and drill submit nominations called expressions of interest to the Bureau of Land Management. The BLM examines the request and analyzes environmental impacts.
A lot of times we hear spokespeople for the oil and gas industry or the president say that we need more leasing, that there needs to be more lands available, that there's a shortfall in the number of leases, and that's what's stopping us from achieving energy dominance. And the numbers just have never supported that.
The oil and gas auctions used to be held in person. These auctions received attention when environmental activist Tim DeChristopher bid on a parcel with no intention of paying in protest of a corrupt and rushed process in 2008. Today, the lease auctions are conducted over the internet. Federal leases are good for 10 years and do not have to be actively drilled to be held. There are myriad schemes to keep these leases on the books longer, and just as many loopholes for companies to acquire more than the allotted amount.
Utah is like most states in the West. There's a surplus of lands that are under lease and not in development. And so those claims by the oil gas industry, their supporters, that if only they had more leases, then the price at the pump would be lower, the price to heat your house would be lower. That's just terribly fictitious. There's very little connection between any oil and gas lease sale and those sorts of things.
But why are there so many acres of land leased but not utilized? Why do so many companies continually need more land when they aren't even using the land they've already leased?
If you would read Securities and Exchange Commission filings, simply having leases on the books and making some claim or having some claim that it's possible to develop them, or that according to federal figures there's X amounts of natural gas and Y amounts of oil there, that helps their bottom line. And so it's in their financial interest to stockpile these leases.
Figures from 2016, according to the Interior Department, indicate that 40% of leases on the books are not active. Put another way, almost half of the leases that the oil companies already own are not under development. So the real reason an oil company needs more leases on the books, even if they are not using the leases they already have, is because of greed.
By the time you see activity on the ground, by the time you see a well like this drilling, you've lost the game in a lot of ways. The lease stage, which is at the time at which you don't see anything, that's the most important point in the process, and that's where the public needs to be involved, because these leases stick around for a long time. People tend to forget that these areas are even leased, but when the market conditions are right and the right company shows up, you're going to have oil development, and the same with natural gas as well. So the lease stage is critical. Obviously, we would like to see a full transition to renewable energy. That's the ideal situation. But at the same time, we recognize that there is a need for oil. There is a need for gas in this country. The question really comes down to is, where is that development appropriate and how is it being done? And it's our position, and I think it should be most Americans' position, that a place like this, the doorstep of a national park, in one of the most scenic areas in the country, is just an completely inappropriate place for resource extraction.
In an administration like this one, in the Trump and Zinke administration, we have our work cut out for us. That's not to say that, the Obama administration wasn't also engaged in oil and gas leasing, but I think they did it in a more thoughtful way, where they recognize that there may be a time and place for that sort of mineral development, but it's not, for example, in the heart of Utah's Red Rock wilderness, and we see the Trump-Zinke administration with much different set of priorities.
We're really talking about a marginal resource up here. In the grand scheme of the amount of oil that we consume in this country, in the grand scheme of the amount of oil that's coming out of places like the Bakken or the Uinta Basin, this is a small percentage of resource. And so the impact compared to the potential adverse impact to the economy of this area, to the wildlife in this area, to the wilderness values of this area, you know, on balance, this is just a really poorly decided place for resource extraction, and it's a place that really should be closed to all drilling and resource extraction.
According to the National Resource Defense Council, the U.S. energy security is more than healthy, as we're producing enough coal, gas, and oil to export it. In fact, last year, thanks in part to exploration of publicly owned resources, the U.S. became the world's top net exporter of fuel.
The people of our state have to make a tremendously important decision. The outdoor people, the hikers, the campers, the sportsmen, the hunters, the fishermen. We have to decide what's going to happen to this land. Are we going to let the men who are in this building tear it down within a generation or two, block it off, allow big international interests to block off our land, or are we going to leave it free and open and clear and recognize that the future of the state of Utah is in the multi-billion-dollar industry of tourism?
As we increasingly transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy, we need to be vigilant in protecting our remaining wilderness from a dying mindset. Literally, a dinosaur mentality. Hopefully, in just a few years, the remnants of these jack pump horsehead oil rigs will be relegated to the dustbin of history, under beautiful Red Rock wilderness.
Well, that's it for this week's episode. In closing, ask yourself, is it worth sacrificing the natural treasures of Utah's great outdoors to meet our energy needs? If you'd like to support those who are fighting for wilderness protection, please visit the Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance online and sign up for their newsletter. They are some of the few people who pay daily attention to the drudgery of BLM lease auctions. And if you'd like to watch previous episodes of Utopia, please visit our website at utopiatvseries.com. And remember, we don't inherit the earth from our parents, we borrow it from our children.